There is a prepositional phrase in Romans 512 that the standard English translations have been smoothing over for centuries, and the smoothing has cost us Paul's argument. The verse reads in most Bibles, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. That last clause, because all sinned, translates the Greek letter 1F10 letter 1Fa7, pi alpha nu tau epsilon sigma, letter 1F25 mu alpha rho tau omicron nu. But the Greek does not say because exactly. It says something more structurally precise and more theologically volatile. The phrase letter 1F10 letter 1Fa7 is a combination of the preposition letter 1F10 pi iota and the relative pronoun letter 1Fa7, and it can mean on the basis of which, or in that, or even for which reason. What it does not mean is in whom. Yet for most of church history, particularly in the Latin tradition, that phrase was read as a reference to Adam himself, in whom all sinned, as though Paul had written a different preposition entirely. Jerome rendered it in the Vulgate as in quo, and that single lexical decision gave the Western Church the entire apparatus of original sin as a biological inheritance. The text, however, does not say what Jerome needed it to say. The problem is not that Paul is uninterested in Adam's role. The problem is that Paul is making a sharper point than the inherited guilt framework allows. He is not saying that Adam's sin is imputed to everyone who comes after him by some mechanism of federal headship or seminal transmission. He is saying that sin entered through Adam, death entered through sin, and then death spread to all people because all sinned, each one, personally, individually, in their own time and with their own hand. That is not a minor grammatical shift. It is the difference between a theology in which you are condemned before you have done anything and a theology in which you are condemned because of what you yourself have done. Paul is not letting anyone off the hook by blaming Adam. He is insisting that Adam's story is everyone's story, not because Adam's guilt biologically reproduces itself, but because every single person repeats exactly what Adam did. The text is not about an inherited condition. It is about a repeated action. This matters immediately for the way a person reads their own life. Most Christians who have been taught the doctrine of original sin have absorbed a kind of second-hand guilt, a sense that they are somehow stained before they have made any choices, that they carry a debt they never incurred. That framework can produce either despair or a strange passivity. If the damage is already done before you start, then your own choices feel less urgent. But Paul is not giving you that room. He is saying that the death that entered through Adam spreads to you because you sin. Not your nature, not your heritage, you. The same word the text uses for Adam's act, the aorist verb, letter 1F25 mu alpha rho tau omicron nu. Sinned it uses for everyone. The same tense, the same finality. Paul is collapsing the distance between the first sin and every subsequent sin, and insisting that the line connecting Adam to you is not a biological thread, but a moral one that you yourself have pulled tight. That is a much more uncomfortable position to be in. You cannot blame your chromosomes. You cannot blame your upbringing. You cannot say that the system was rigged from the start. Paul is saying it was rigged, yes, but only in the sense that every person who has ever existed has chosen what Adam chose. Now here is the detail that most readers miss, and that the translations subtly conceal. In the Greek, the phrase death spread to all men uses the verb delta iota, letter 1Fc6 lambda theta epsilon nu, which means pass through, or when across it, is the same word used in the Septuagint for the Passover, when the destroyer passed through the houses of Egypt. Paul is drawing on that resonance. Death is not a passive condition that seeps into humanity like a slow poison. Death is an active agent that moves, that passes through, that visits. And it visits everyone not because they were born in Adam's line, but because the text says in the same breath that all sinned. The causal connection is explicit: death passed through because all sinned. Paul does not say death passed through to all men because Adam sinned. He says it passed through because all sinned. Adam is the entry point, not the exclusive cause. The cause is universal and personal. There is an uncomfortable implication here that the tradition has spent a great deal of energy trying to domesticate. If death spread because all sinned, then Paul has removed the theological buffer that original sin provides. Original sin, in its classical form, is a way of explaining why infants who have not personally committed any sin still die. They die because they inherit Adam's guilt. It is a pastoral solution to a pastoral problem, but Paul does not give that solution in this verse. He does not mention infants. He does not mention inherited guilt. He mentions one man, one act, one entry point, and then every other person's own act. The text creates a tension that the doctrine of original sin was designed to resolve, but the text itself does not resolve it. Paul simply states the sequence: sin entered, death entered, then everyone sinned, so death spread. The logic is tight, but it leaves an open question. What about those who have not sinned in the same way Adam did? Paul actually addresses that question in the next verse. Verse 13 says sin was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not counted where there is no law. And then he trails off into a grammatical ellipsis that the translators have to patch. That ellipsis is the place where Paul's argument is working hardest, and we will come back to it. But for now, the point is that the first half of the argument, verse 12, does not give you the comfort of a system in which your guilt is someone else's fault. It gives you the opposite. What Paul is building is a parallel between Adam and Christ. The whole passage from verse 12 through verse 21 is a comparison of typos in Greek, a pattern or type. Adam is a type of the one who was to come, meaning Christ, but the comparison only works if both sides are structurally analogous. If Adam's act automatically condemned everyone without their own involvement, then Christ's act would automatically save everyone without their own involvement. And some people have read Paul that way, universalism. But Paul explicitly limits the comparison in verse 15. The free gift is not like the trespass. He says the trespass affected many, but the gift abounds to many more. He is not constructing a mechanical one-to-one equivalence. He is constructing a pattern in which one person's act changes the situation for everyone, but the mechanism of that change is not the same on both sides. On the Adam side, the mechanism is that Adam's sin opened the door, sin entered, death entered, and then every person who followed walked through that door themselves. On the Christ side, the mechanism is that Christ's righteousness is offered, and those who receive it are counted righteous. Paul is careful. Adam's act brought condemnation, but Christ's act brings justification of life. The word justification itself implies a legal declaration that must be received. It is not automatic. Adam's act made death inevitable for everyone because everyone sins. Christ's act makes life possible for everyone because everyone can receive the gift. That asymmetry is the whole point. Paul is not saying you are doomed because of Adam. He is saying you are doomed because of what you have done, and that doom is universal. But because it is universal, the offer of life in Christ is also universal. The gospel is not a solution to a problem you never created. It is a solution to a problem you have actively participated in every day of your life. That is why Paul can use such sweeping language as one trespass led to condemnation for all men. So one act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all men, without implying that everyone is automatically saved. The all on the condemnation side is verifiable. All have sinned, so all are under death. The all on the justification side is an open offer, but Paul assumes that his readers know the difference between an offer and an automatic transfer. The letter to the Romans has been building toward this argument since chapter 1, where Paul says that the wrath of God is revealed against all ungodliness, and that both Jews and Gentiles are under sin. He has spent 3 chapters demonstrating that every mouth is stopped, and the whole world is held accountable to God. That is the context for Romans 512. It is not a new doctrine dropping in from nowhere. It is the culmination of a long argument about universal guilt and universal need. And yet the verse has been read as the proof text for a doctrine that Paul never explicitly states that infants are born guilty of Adam's sin. Augustine read it that way through Jerome's Latin, and the Western Church followed. The Eastern Church, reading the Greek, never developed a doctrine of original sin in the same form. They read letter 1F10 letter 1Fa7 as because not in whom, and they understood Paul to mean exactly what the Greek surface says: death spread to all because all sinned. That difference is not a denominational quibble. It is the difference between a gospel that confronts you with your own responsibility and a gospel that allows you to deflect responsibility onto a figure from the distant past. Paul is not interested in deflection. He is interested in diagnosis. And the diagnosis in this verse is precise. You are not dying because Adam sinned. You are dying because you did what Adam did. The death that is in your body is the signature of your own sin. But Paul is not finished with the tension. He introduces it in verse 12 with the claim that all sinned. And then in verse 13 he opens a problem. Sin was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not counted where there is no law. That sentence appears to qualify everything he just said. If sin is not counted where there is no law, then how can Paul say that all sinned? People who lived between Adam and Moses had the law of conscience, yes, but Paul has already argued in Romans 2 that conscience is insufficient for justification. Yet here he says sin is not counted without law. The Greek verb for counted is letter 1 F10 lambda lambda omicron gamma epsilon letter 1 FD6 tau alpha iota. An accounting term, it means something is charged to an account. Paul is saying that the legal charge of sin, the formal indictment, only exists where a law has been given. And the law was given through Moses, not through Adam. So what about the people who lived in the gap? How can they be held accountable if their sin was not formally charged? Paul's answer is devastatingly simple, and he delivers it in verse 14 with a single word, nevertheless. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those whose sin was not like the transgression of Adam. Death reigned. The word for reigned is letter 1 F10 beta alpha sigma iota lambda epsilon upsilon sigma epsilon u, a royal verb. Death occupied the throne. It ruled over every person who lived between Adam and Moses, regardless of whether they had broken a written command. Paul is not retreating from his claim in verse 12. He is deepening it. He is saying that the reign of death is not dependent on the formal legal counting of sin. Death reigned because sin was present, not counted, but present. Present in the same way that Adam's sin was present as an act of defiance against the order of creation itself. The people between Adam and Moses did not need a written law to rebel. They rebelled through their own choices, through violence, through idolatry, through the refusal to honor God as God. The text does not need to list their sins because the pattern is the same. Every human being, when placed in a position of choice, chooses what Adam chose, the self over the command. And death answers that choice not as a legal penalty handed down from a distant judge, but as the organic consequence of living in a way that rejects the source of life. This reframes the entire argument. The traditional reading of Romans 5 tends to treat death as a punishment that God inflicts because Adam's guilt is imputed. But Paul's language here is different. He does not say that God sent death as a penalty. He says death reigned. The verb is in the active voice, and the indicative mood, it describes something that happened, a condition that took hold. Death entered and then it ruled, and it ruled because sin gave it legal authority within the human condition. Sin gave death its throne. Every act of sin is a transfer of allegiance from the God who gives life to the power that takes it. And that transfer is not something that happens to you. It is something you perform. Paul is not describing a cosmic accident. He is describing a coup that every human being has joined. The weight of this for the present-day reader is almost unbearable if you sit with it long enough. Most people, when they consider their own sin, think in terms of individual failures, a lie here, a resentment there, a moment of lust, a burst of anger. They treat sin as a collection of discrete mistakes that can be managed, confessed, and forgiven one at a time. Paul is not interested in that inventory. He is interested in the fact that every single one of those acts, however small, is a vote for the regime of death. Every time you choose to act as though your desires are more important than God's commands, you are not just breaking a rule. You are reaffirming your citizenship in Adam's kingdom. You are saying with your hands and your mouth and your heart that the pattern Adam established is the pattern you choose to follow. Paul's argument strips away the illusion that sin is a minor behavioral problem. Sin is a declaration of loyalty, and death is the king you have declared loyalty to. Now look at the Greek word Paul uses for the legal side of this in verse 16. He says the judgment following one trespass brought condemnation. The word for condemnation is kappa alpha tau alpha kappa rho iota mu alpha. It means a judicial sentence, a verdict that carries a penalty. It is the opposite of delta iota kappa alpha iota omega mu alpha, which is the judicial verdict of acquittal or justification. Paul is building a courtroom. Adam is in the dock, and his act produces a verdict. But here is the crucial detail: the condemnation that comes through Adam is not the condemnation of all people as if they were Adam. It is the condemnation that stands over all people because they have repeated Adam's act. Paul does not say that all were condemned in Adam. He says that through one trespass condemnation came to all. The phrase "to all" is the dative pi alpha nu tau alpha sigma, meaning it extended to all, but the mechanism is not imputation, it is participation. Condemnation came because the trespass opened the door, and every person after Adam walked through it. The courtroom is not a place where you are judged for someone else's crime. It is a place where you are judged for your own, and the evidence that you committed it is the presence of death in your body. This is where Paul's parallel with Christ becomes not just theological but existential. He says in verse 17 that if death reigned through one man's trespass, then those who receive the abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness will reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ. Notice the word receive. The Greek is lambda alpha mu beta alpha nu omicron nu tau epsilon sigma, a present participle, those who are receiving. It is an ongoing action. Grace is not injected. Righteousness is not biologically transmitted. It is received, and it is received by the same faculty that Adam used to sin, the will. The same will that chooses death can choose to receive life. Paul is not offering a different mechanism. He is offering a different object of allegiance. The structure of human responsibility is identical on both sides. Adam made a choice. You make the same choice. Christ made a choice. You can make that choice instead. And that is what makes the original sin reading so dangerous. It subtly teaches people that their relationship to sin is passive. They are sinners because they were born that way, and they can be saved because they were born again. Both are true in a sense, but the passive framing obscures the active participation that Paul demands. You are not a sinner because Adam sinned. You are a sinner because you sin. You are not righteous because Christ was righteous. You are righteous because you receive his righteousness. Paul preserves moral agency on both sides. He does not turn salvation into a biological process. He turns it into an act of allegiance, a transfer of citizenship, a decision to live under a different king. The cultural context of the Roman world makes this sharper. Paul's audience knew what it meant to transfer allegiance from one emperor to another. They knew that a Roman citizen who declared loyalty to a rival emperor was committing treason, and that the penalty was death. They also knew that a new emperor could grant amnesty to those who renounced their former loyalties and pledged allegiance to him. That is the framework Paul is using. He is not writing a systematic theology of inherited guilt. He is writing a declaration of war between two kingdoms. Adam's kingdom is the kingdom of death, and every human being is born into it not by blood, but by choice, the choice that every person makes to sin. Christ's kingdom is the kingdom of life, and every person enters it by the same route, choosing to receive the gift. There is no third option. There is no neutral ground. There is no way to be a citizen of both. The final move in the passage, verses 18 through 21, is where Paul sums everything up, and the language is sweeping in a way that has caused interpreters to stumble for 2,000 years. He says that as one trespass led to condemnation for all men, so one act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all men. The Greek word for all men is pi alpha nu tau alpha sigma, letter 1 F00 nu theta rho omega pi omicron upsilon sigma, which is as universal as language gets. But Paul has already established the condition for receiving that justification: it must be received. The universality is not about automatic salvation. It is about the scope of the offer. The condemnation was universal because all sinned. The justification is universal because Christ's act is sufficient for all, and the offer extends to all. But the reception is individual. Paul says in verse 17 that those who receive the abundance of grace reign in life. He does not say that all will reign. The parallel is not mechanical. It is a parallel of scope, not of application. And that brings us to the last thing Paul says in the passage. Verse 21, so that, as sin reigned in death, grace might also reign through righteousness, leading to eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. The word reigned is the same verb, letter 1 F10 beta alpha sigma iota lambda epsilon upsilon sigma epsilon u, that he used for death in verse 14. Paul is saying that grace now occupies the throne that death once held. Death reigned, grace reigns, and the transition happens not through a legal transaction that bypasses your will, but through your active reception of the gift. The reign of grace is not automatic. It is realized in you when you stop letting sin reign in your mortal body. As Paul writes later in Romans 6, the entire letter is a call to act on what has been given. So here is the question the passage finally leaves you with, and it is not abstract. Paul has dismantled the comfort of original sin. He has removed the buffer of inherited guilt. He has placed the full weight of your death squarely on your own shoulders. And then he has placed the full weight of Christ's life on the same shoulders as an offer. You can no longer say that you are a sinner because of Adam. You are a sinner because of what you have done. You can no longer say that you are saved because you were born into a Christian family or baptized as an infant. You are saved because you have received the gift. The text does not ask whether you believe you inherited Adam's sin. It asks whether you have stopped blaming Adam and started confessing your own. Because until you do, the good news about Jesus will always sound like a story about someone else.